Hey, thanks for joining me. So, this is something that I've kind of had on my mind for a while. I was doing a live stream a couple of months ago, actually, and one of my viewers who was on the live stream, I can't remember who, but kind of threw out the question because a lot of times during the live streams, people will throw out questions just randomly just to kind of engage in conversation and get people talking about stuff. And he asked a really interesting question that. He asked, who do I think is the greater creative force, Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld? And I thought it was a really interesting question, and it really made me kind of stop because my initial instinct was like, well, Jim Lee, of course. But then I'm like, well, I started thinking about it. There's a little bit of a discussion on the live stream, but kind of went off in its own direction. But it kept me coming back to it in my head. And I'm like, well, the question begs you to stop your kind of preconceived notions about each one of these two very popular comic book creators. The question is, who's the greater creative force? And again, my first instinct was to just default to Jim Lee. But then I realized, I was like, I think I'm just leaning into thinking about who I like more and who I think is a better artist and what the general consensus of how each one of them is perceived. And that's not the question, though. They're perceived in different ways, and I like their art for different reasons or dislike their art for different reasons. But who is a greater creative force? So it made me stop and like, well, let me think about how you would break that down. But just for a basic, super quick overview, pretty much everyone watching my videos who is probably tuning into this, you all know all the basics of these guys. But for just a basic rundown, to start, Jim Lee, born August 11th, 1964. Just as a kind of a basic overview of the works that he's done, starting in 87, he was doing stuff for Alpha Flight and Punisher before he got lucky gig doing Uncanny X-Men, where he kind of did a couple of issues here and there before obviously becoming the primary main penciler for a long run, which is widely considered by many people, myself included, the best work he's ever done. Is during his Uncanny X-Men run where he encountered and started working with the inker Scott Williams. And they've maintained a working relationship to this day. And then obviously we all know X-Men #1, which sold 8.1 million copies, a record for American comics that will never be broken. And had this massive, the greatest heights of comic book sales and popularity any artist could ever hope to have. Then, of course, in 92, with all the other Image guys that go off and form Image Comics, he comes up with all his own characters for the Wildstorm universe, Wildcats, Gen 13, a whole slew of characters. We all know that. And then around about 96, he, along with Rob Liefeld, go back to Marvel to do the Heroes Reborn thing. And Jim Lee does his Fantastic Four run. Then he comes back to Image Comics. He does his Divine Right run. He wants to write and draw his own creator-owned series on his own, which he did. Then in 98, according to interviews and words from Jim Lee himself, he got sick of spending so much time as a publisher, and he wanted to spend more time drawing. So he sold Wildstorm, his studio, to DC Comics, and then from there he's been, so that was 1998 if I have my information right. He goes and now he's with DC Comics, and he's been there ever since. And he's done Batman Hush and Superman for Tomorrow. 2010, he was named co-publisher with Dan DiDio. In 2018, he was listed as Chief Creative Officer. And as I understand it, 2023, he was listed, elevated to status of President of DC Comics. That's a hell of a run of stuff. By comparison, Liefeld, he was born October 3rd, 1967. He started off, I think it's 1988, Hawk and Dove for DC. You know, this is just a brief overview. There's like one-offs and maybe a cover here or a single issue there for both of them, but kind of the essentials. We all know this. He did Hawk and Dove, then he comes back. He does like an issue of X-Men. He does a Spider-Man annual. Then he jumps on New Mutants round about issue 85 and becomes kind of the main creative force, taking over penciling, I think inking at some point. I don't think he started out inking himself, but eventually he did, and taking over creative control, writing to New Mutants and driving it to great success. And obviously doing X-Force #1, and the numbers that I see kind of are contradictory a little bit, somewhere between 4 or 5 million copies of X-Force. My understanding is that it's 5 million copies. And then obviously Liefeld had his own level of success. He was in that very popular, very smart move of his to do that Levi's commercial. And then same thing with all the Image guys in 92. He goes off to do Image Comics, and he has more books put out than anybody else in any other studio. Youngblood, Brigade, Bloodstrike, Glory, Prophet, Supreme, Team Youngblood, Troll, Newman, Evangeline, etc., etc. It goes on and on. There's multiple titles, one-offs from single characters, things you probably never even heard of. At the same time, 1996, he goes with Jim Lee to do The Heroes Reborn, and Jim Lee, there was a lot of positive talk, generally speaking, around his Fantastic Four run as compared to Liefeld's Captain America run, which was highly controversial for all the reasons we understand. And then Liefeld, after that, he goes back to Marvel. He gets done with that. He comes back to Image Comics and keeps doing his various things. But he, as his career went on, he goes back to Marvel in varying degrees. He's doing Deadpool stuff. He's doing Wolverine stuff. He's doing X-Force Volume 2. He goes back to DC and does Hawk and Dove stuff. He does Snake Eyes, all these different things. So each one of these guys has had a career the likes of which most comic artists could never even begin to imagine. Like highs that are just unattainable. Any one of these things, any comic artist would be happy to have. Like taking a title that's in the dumps sales-wise and your creative force drives it to extreme success and you're making crazy money. But then each one of these guys, Jim Lee and Liefeld, both have like multiple career highlights that are kind of comparable depending on how you look at it. When I think about Jim Lee, when I think of controversies, again, I'm thinking in broad brushing this. Somebody might be like, well, there was this thing or there was that thing. Look, like no one who's going to have this kind of visibility and popularity is going to be without somebody bitching about something. But generally speaking, Jim Lee, there's almost no controversies about him, really. And then kind of the pros about him that you can think about, generally speaking, everyone seems to like the guy. He seems nice. He's very well spoken. He seems kind. I met him once. Got to go to a signing here in my where I live and got to meet him for a few seconds. He signed a comic. I got a picture with him. It was awesome. He's professional all the way, and it seems like everyone thinks of him as being extremely professional. Rob Liefeld, on the other hand, where Jim Lee has zero controversies, Liefeld is nothing but controversy. Again, depending on your opinion and how you feel about things, the generally accepted controversies include up to and including terrible art, shit books, market saturation in the 90s of the aforementioned shit books, trying to steal Michael Turner away from Mark Silvestri, which is just extremely unprofessional, which, from what everyone's basic understanding is, led to Silvestri leaving Image Comics. And it seemed like the Image guys, for all the varying reasons that they decided to kick Liefeld out of the group, it seems like they'd rather keep Silvestri than keep Liefeld on. That's just kind of what it seems. So obviously they voted to move him out, and then Liefeld quit and resigned before they could vote to move him out. And then, of course, the controversy of his Captain America comic not being great. He has Kickstarters and crowdfunders that are still to this day, from what I understand, partially unfulfilled. Accusations of copying or swiping characters and images completely wholesale. Another problem with Liefeld is that, as compared to Jim Lee, who seems to be like a nice guy with a nice personality and everyone likes him, Liefeld tends to be a huge jerk online. And this is where I'll give him a little bit of credit. Yes, he is a huge jerk online, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. It's a little bit understandable due to the level of criticism he constantly gets. For decades now, everyone shits on him. Now, that might sound hypocritical coming from me, considering the content of my channel, but I want to reiterate, I only talk about his comics and his art. I'm not talking about the human being. I've never met him. I don't know anything about him personally. I'm not talking about the human being and the man himself. I'm just talking about his art. But there are people that just hate the guy, just think he's just the biggest piece of scum on the face of the planet. And because of that, he gets really defensive and pissy online. He gets in arguments. He down talks and talks really negatively about fellow professional creators, in a manner that's kind of like unnecessary. He treats fans online way too harsh for even the most like pedestrian and of basic, simple like remarks. Even like people that say, I'm a huge fan of yours, Mr. Liefeld. I love your work. I didn't care for this, but I love everything else you do. And he will see a statement like that and block you from all his social media just because you said, I didn't care for this, but everything else I love. And it's so stupid because he's just harming his own fan base, which then leads it to be a fan base consisting of nothing but people who just kiss his ass and every step of the way, every time, no matter what. And Liefeld will not abide or hear any type of criticism in the slightest. And I think that's honestly bad form and poor choice for artistic growth. But I also kind of understand it because he's been the whipping boy for so many people for so long. It's just a nonstop barrage from a certain subset of people who, again, are not just talking about his art or his comics like I do. They're talking about him like he's just the worst man to ever walk the planet. And it's so over the top. Even I'm kind of like, you guys are taking this way too far. Like, come on. Yes, he's got some business practices and choices he's made that are questionable at the best and kind of pathetic at the worst, but come on, like you could scale it back. He comes across as smug and arrogant, fighting with people online all the time, insulting fellow creators, just like I said. So those are the controversies. If I had to list the pros about Liefeld, just as a guy as someone I don't know, you could go out and find a lot of stories from a lot of people that know him and have met him and say that he's fun, he's nice, he's kind, he's energetic, he's passionate about his love for comics. He pushed the comics medium forward. He tells people to go find this, go find that, buy your comics, love them, enjoy them, spread the word. He's like an ambassador for comics. Like he's absolutely just out there telling you to enjoy what you like and go for it, and that comics are a great thing to have. I also appreciate the fact that separating him from his art and his business and his comics, he seems to be an extremely down-to-earth family man. Like he loves his wife, he loves his kids, and he shouts it out at the top of his lungs on his social media whenever it comes up, whenever it's the anniversary of his marriage or the birthday of his kids or his wife or anything like that. He's constantly shouting out his love for his family, and I will respect any human being that does that. And you could honestly say the same about all of that as the positives I've just listed for Liefeld. I could honestly say the same thing about Jim Lee. Seems like a nice guy. People talk to him. People like him. He's always hyping up comics. You know, they kind of got the same thing. So I'm going to give full credit to Liefeld for that. He's earned that from me. But so that's just kind of a basic rundown of the credits of the stuff that they've done, the work that we all know, and then again the positives and negatives from the general perception of these two guys as it seems to be in the comic book community. And then this is where the question comes into play for me. It started out as who's the greater creative force, and my instinct was to go to Jim Lee, but that's because I like Jim Lee. He seems nice and he's kind and he's personally responsible for some of the funnest, most exciting times in comics that I've ever had. He was the best, most incredible artist to me for so long. But Liefeld was kind of right there with him. He was responsible for some of the funnest, most exciting comics I've ever read. But for me personally, Jim Lee wins. But Liefeld was right there with him. So it's kind of the same thing, but as time has gone on, generally speaking, the public perception is that everyone likes Jim Lee and everyone hates Rob Liefeld. And it's both kind of earned and not earned. Jim Lee, he just kind of seems like he's just a guy just doing his thing. And, we like him. He's a nice guy. Liefeld, he's so polarizing. Some people either just love him or some people just hate him. And it almost doesn't seem like there's an in-between. So, but now when we get to the question, who's the greater creative force? This is where it all kind of changes. I kind of try to think about, when I think about Jim Lee, yes, he was on X-Men. And this is where I think Jim Lee excels. He will draw the coolest version of an existing thing. Like Wolverine and the X-Men were all very cool and very popular before him. But to my mind, this is personal opinion. I'm not saying that this is the general consensus of the comic book community at large. Remember, this entire video is just my opinion. I'm not telling you what you should think. I'm not a historian just reciting facts. I went over some basics, but right now, this is just my opinion. And in my opinion, Jim Lee will draw the coolest version of something that already exists. He drew the coolest version of the X-Men I've ever seen. And that remains to this day. I mean, the best version of the X-Men is the Claremont John Byrne run, yes. But for me, the coolest version, man, it's when Jim Lee was doing Uncanny X-Men and then even the regular X-Men title that he started. They just have never looked cooler. And now he's over at DC. I'm not a big DC Comics guy. I love Superman. I love Batman, but I don't want to read a lot of their comics. It depends on who the creator is and who's in charge or who's doing the creative work. I'll pick up something, but Jim Lee on Batman, I could not care less about. It just doesn't appeal to me. And Jim Lee's been with DC from, when did I say that was? 1998? Sold Wildstorm to DC. He's been at DC Comics doing nothing but Batman, Superman, Justice League stuff for, that's almost 30 years, right? And I'm like, I don't fucking care. I've made this argument a bunch of times, and I don't think anybody would deny this. You want to have the highest selling comic book of the last 30 years? Get Jim Lee back to Marvel and put him on a 12-issue X-Men run, and it will blow everything up. Everyone would love to see Jim Lee back at X-Men. I say everyone, broadly speaking, generally speaking. Don't come at me in the comics with, fuck that, I don't want to see it. Like, I know you don't, somebody out there, but generally speaking, you put Jim Lee back on X-Men, things blow up. But over at DC, he's just drawing DC Comics characters. And I don't think he's drawing the best version of Batman ever, not even close. So, and I don't think he's done the best version of anything over there. So, my point of Jim Lee drawing the coolest version of something that you've ever seen, it doesn't apply to everything, but it's just for me personally. But it's the point being is that he's at DC, and that's all he's doing. And then when I think about what are notable things that he's created that have lasted the test of time, and honestly, there's not much. The closest thing that I could come up with is that he co-created Gambit. Chris Claremont created the character, and as far as I understand it, and again, please correct me if I have this wrong, but Jim Lee created the visuals for Gambit, and I'm sorry, My personal opinion, Gambit's costume is fucking ugly. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You can make it look cool in a comic book, but you try to translate that to real life. Like, I thought Channing Tatum was hilarious in Deadpool 3, but that outfit looked ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. I also believe that Jim Lee created Omega Red, but that is like a C-list character at best. Yes, people know him, but it's not anything that anybody's like, he's one of the greatest characters ever made. Another thing that when I talk about what has Jim Lee created that stood the test of time, and a lot of people would be like, well, the X-Men uniforms. He gave them all new outfits in X-Men #1. And I'm like, yeah, he gave them new outfits, but like Cyclops' outfit was just derivative of his original design. He just gave him like belts and straps and stuff and opened up the top of his skull cap thing so his hair's hanging out. Jean Grey's costume in X-Men #1, it's one of the ugliest designs I've ever seen. None of Jim Lee's costume designs, I think every one of the Wildcats costumes designs looks ridiculously stupid. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't think Jim Lee's a good designer of costumes. I'm sorry, I just don't. I don't think any costume he's designed works. You know, it's kind of okay, but it's not iconic. It just might be something people remember, but in my opinion, it's not iconic. There seems to be a question of that maybe Jim Lee designed Psylocke's ninja outfit from that outfit when she got turned from British Psylocke to Asian Psylocke. That ninja outfit, I think that is iconic, but I'm not certain who designed it. I want to say that it's Jim Lee, and if it is, that is the one that I'll give him. I'm just not certain, but that Psylocke outfit looks great. So as far as notable characters and things that he's created, you know, he did things for Marvel that were like the most popular versions, but it's all kind of derivative of other stuff. And then none of his Image Comics stuff is anything that anybody will remember really as some of the greatest stuff in the history of ever. People will remember McFarlane's Spawn, you know, but no one's going to remember, hey, you remember Wildcats? You remember those designs? You remember those awesome stories? It's just going to be kind of like, oh yeah, Jim Lee did Wildcats. It was a bunch of superheroes fighting lizards or something. Gen 13 might arguably be the most popular creation, but that's multiple people creating that, and I would assign that success 100% to J. Scott Campbell's incredible art and his direction. So again, what has Jim Lee created brand new that will stand the test of time? He's got derivative costumes, partial credit in the creation of other characters, all of which are pretty incredible, but as compared to Liefeld, this is where it shocks me to want to say, but in my opinion, there's some undeniable truths. Some of those truths are that Liefeld has created a quadrillion characters, way more than Jim Lee. Now, most of them suck and are boring and are derivative, but the question is who's more creative? Who's a greater creative force? And when you think about the characters, like Liefeld's kind of got him beat in terms of how many things he's created. Now, I'm not talking about if they're good or bad. I mean, that could be part of the conversation, but Liefeld just throws out idea after idea after idea. He's an idea man. The execution of the idea seems to be lacking most of the time, especially these days. His new Youngblood series is just awful. But in terms of secondary characters that he's created that everyone kind of knows, Shatterstar, Domino, Feral from X-Force, those are all like reasonably popular characters. But Liefeld has done something that Jim Lee and none of the other Image creators can say that they've done. He's created not one, but two A-list, top-tier, legendary characters that will forever be part of the Marvel Universe no matter what. And you know who they are. It starts out with Cable, who was like hyper-popular anti-hero, leader of the New Mutants, and goes and takes over and makes X-Force. And again, if you weren't there at the time, you probably don't understand the level of popularity that Cable had. There's no denying it. Now, there seems to be a question again as to co-creator credit. I think it's Louise Simonson on New Mutants. But, and, you know, if that's the truth, like there's co-creation kind of credit due there. But being completely honest, it's Liefeld's art and direction of the stories and the mystery of the guy that drove it to success. Because Louise Simonson was off the book. I have that right? I don't have. I have a bunch of notes in front of me, but I didn't write down who was writing New Mutants with Liefeld. I'm pretty sure I've got that right. Again, correct me if I've got it wrong. But whoever was writing the New Mutants with him, he took over the book and directed it. And some people want to argue the creation of these characters, but honestly, Liefeld directed Cable to his success. And again, as is the case all the time, more artists and writers have come along over the years to build on the existing lore and the character that might have been a small little thing to start with that Liefeld started, but it caught on, and Cable is now one of the premier X-Men Marvel characters of all time. It's just simply the truth. They even kind of retconned him to be Cyclops and I think not Jean Grey, but fucking Goblin Queen, whatever the hell her name was. You know who I'm talking about. You know, the son of Cyclops. And then obviously the other one is Deadpool. And then again, there seems to be a little bit of contention between people, like how much credit do you give Fabian Nicieza for doing the script on early Deadpool issues or in X-Force? Because you're like, well, he had hand in creating the character because Nicieza scripted it. That's fair, but the DNA, the starting character elements of Deadpool, the idea, the costume design, which is iconic on a level that nothing Jim Lee has ever created will ever match. And then again, the fourth wall breaking, that's not something that Liefeld created. Other guys did. Yes. So that element to the character has been added to Deadpool. But again, if you weren't there at the time, no matter what you might think about giving, I hear a lot of people say that Deadpool needs to be given more creative credit in his creation to the other writers who added things like the fourth wall breaking. And sure, that's 100% fair, but that doesn't exist if he didn't create the concept of the character in the first place. Deadpool is just evil Spider-Man. You know, red costume, big eyes, wisecracking asshole, super badass fighter. And good name, great costume design. It all starts with what Liefeld created. And that's just the simple fact. He created it. Even if what he created is not the sum total of who the character becomes. He still started it. Liefeld created not one, but two iconic characters that are like top tier A-list Marvel characters and forever will be. And so when taking everything into account, just forgetting like the past, like all the works that they've done and how the general public perceives each one of them, how Jim Lee's well liked and Liefeld's widely hated and all the controversies that Liefeld's done, all that type of stuff. When you talk about who's the greater creative force, it has to go to Liefeld. Again, even if so much of the stuff that he's created is not great, Liefeld never stops drawing comics. He is always drawing something. I'm still constantly amazed at the amount of stuff I keep running into that he's done. And he's jumping all over the place. He's doing all those titles that he did from Image Comics from Extreme Studios, whether he's co-plotting them or writing or drawing part of them, driving all of that stuff, driving all his ideas and his art. And then he goes off and he's doing the Shield over here and Fighting American over there and Snake Eyes here. And then he's doing Bloodstrike books and he's doing Youngblood books. He's constantly creating and drawing in a level to which Jim Lee is not. And to give creator credit to who's the greater creative force, Liefeld is, you know, he's constantly dipping into Marvel, which he's subsequently said he's done doing. He was dipping into DC, going back and doing Hawk and Dove, which he said he's done doing. But now he's back full swing doing his own characters, and he's got a whole new title of some space age kind of like Buck Rogers looking thing that's supposed to be coming out soon. He's just constantly making new stuff. The problem is it's mostly junk. We'll just go back and watch any of my videos on any of the books he's done. For the most part, outside of his earlier New Mutants and X-Force stuff, I like that stuff, but everything he's done from an objective kind of story structure and art, it's just kind of awful. He can't begin to hold a candle to the technical artistic superiority that Jim Lee has. But Jim Lee can't hold a candle to the constant character creation and pages upon pages and upon pages of art and comics that Liefeld produces. And Jim Lee has never created a character that's even come close to reaching the heights of Cable and Deadpool. So there's a lot of kind of like asterisks in that kind of like breakdown of how Liefeld wins. Yes, his art sucks. Yes, his stories are terrible. Yes, he's a controversial douchebag. But he's drawing all the time. He's constantly throwing out new characters, and he's made iconic characters that have stood the test of time, and Jim Lee cannot say the same. Jim Lee's got some of the most incredible credentials any artist could ever hope to have. You get to draw Uncanny X-Men? Holy shit. You draw a whole new title of X-Men selling the highest number of American comic books of all time? Holy crap. Any artist would love that. Then you get to run off and go make your own comic book company with a bunch of your homies and create every comic and every title that ever crosses your mind. And you get to reap all the financial rewards. Jim Lee did that. He gets to go back to Marvel and do the Fantastic Four, the iconic first family of Marvel. You get to write and draw a Fantastic Four comic, and then you get to get hired on at DC and basically have a blank check at DC Comics to do whatever the hell you want. Every one of those, that's the most incredible career. Like each one of those things that Jim Lee has done, any artist would love to have. And Liefeld's got mostly the same, starting off with New Mutants, going on to X-Force, going on to Image, and but he's just constantly creating his own books, his own characters, and whether we like it or not, he's having huge financial success with his current works on Youngblood. He's making a lot of money and putting books out there and just kind of working for himself, selling his stuff to people just privately, forgoing shops to start. So both of them are powerful creative forces, and you can kind of weigh the back and forth about who's more popular and who's the better artist and who's done the most legendary type of stuff. But in terms of who's a greater creative force, even if it's by a small margin, I have to give it to Liefeld. He's the greater creative force, and I'll stand by that statement. But I'd be happy to hear any comments that any of you have about that. I'd be interested to kind of know what you think. I can already hear people yelling at me like, he doesn't get credit for Cable. He doesn't get sole credit for Deadpool. Like, I don't care. They don't exist without him starting it. And he created it, even if it was added on to by other people. Like, we understand that happened, but it starts with him. So, you know, I would rather have dinner with Jim Lee. I'd rather talk up Jim Lee and kind of ask him about what he's done and what he likes and what's his career like. And I feel like I could sit and talk to Jim Lee forever. And Liefeld probably is just man-to-man, a human being. If you just run into him and just start chatting him up, he's probably a perfectly fine human being to talk to. I struggle so much with his art. Again, go watch any of my videos on his stuff. How it's just so unbelievable how lazy it is. It just infuriates me. But if we're talking about the point of this video and the conversation we're having, who's the greater creative force, it's going to Liefeld for me on this one. So that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for indulging me on this. This is something a little bit different from me. It's just a conversation I wanted to have, and so I just thought I'd kind of throw something together a little bit different rather than just staring at a comic book. I just thought I'd talk about it and do a little research and write some notes, and here we are. So I hope you enjoyed this. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching my channel. You know, if you want to, you know, like the video, if you like what I've got, you can subscribe and watch my stuff. You can share it around. it's fine. I appreciate anybody watching my stuff on any level. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.